You are looking at a graveyard where nothing ever lived. If you blink, you miss the cosmic error. A glitch in the dark. We are taught that space is a place of light, of burning gas, of stars that command the void. But most things out there aren't stars at all. They are ghosts. They are the things that tried to wake up and failed. Think of a star. It is a beast. Gravity crushes dust into a tight hot ball until the core screams with light. That is success. But what happens when the math goes wrong? What happens when a star-to-be doesn't have enough mass to start the fire? It enters a state that shouldn't exist. It is too big to be a planet, yet too small to be a sun. It is a brown dwarf. Honestly, nobody really knows how many of them are hiding in our own backyard. They drift through the dark, cold as a tomb, invisible to the eyes we evolved to see with. They are the cosmic debris of failed ambition. They were born with the blueprint for brilliance. Yet they spend their entire existence in the twilight between being something and being nothing. Imagine the pressure. Not the physical kind, but the existential weight of a soul that never got its spark. They do not shine. They only glow with the fading heat of their own collapse. They are cooling down the moment they form. We like to think of the universe as a machine that works. Gravity pulls, light ignites, life orbits. But look at these objects. They prove the universe is indifferent. It doesn't care if you have enough mass to sustain your glow. It doesn't care if you were meant to light up a system. If you are a few grams short of the threshold, you are tossed aside. Consider the object known as Lumen 16. It is one of our closest neighbors. A pair of these dark giants, spinning in a silent, slow-motion waltz just 6 light years away. They are so close, yet for all of human history, we were blind to them. They were right there, hovering in the dark, and we didn't even know they existed. Why are they so hard to find? Because they have no inner sun. They are not fueled by the violent joy of fusion. They are just cooling embers. Think about the silence of a brown dwarf. There is no solar wind here. No radiation pressure to clear away the debris. Just a heavy, stagnant sphere of gas, thick as soup, hiding its secrets behind layers of clouds that would crush a human in an instant. It makes you wonder about the nature of growth. Is it better to burn bright and die fast? Or is it better to linger in the cold, a shadow of what you could have been? We track them with infrared sensors, catching the faint, dying heat they leak into the void. It's like looking for a person in a darkened house by the warmth of their skin. They are leaking away their history. Every second, they get colder. Every second, they get dimmer. There is a strange, unsettling quality to their path. They don't move with the purpose of a sun. They wander. They drift through the interstellar medium like castaways, caught in the gravity of stars they can never join. Do you ever feel like you're waiting for a spark that isn't coming? We stare at the sky and project our own fears onto it. We see a ball of gas that failed to fuse atoms, and we call it a tragedy. We see a planet-sized shadow, and we call it a ghost. But that's just us. The universe doesn't call them failures. It just lets them drift. Maybe that's the most terrifying part. They aren't trying to be stars. They are exactly what they are. We look at them and feel pity or dread because we are hardwired to value the light. We are terrified of the dark corners of the room. But out there, in the vast, crushing expanse between galaxies, the darkness is the default. We are the anomaly. And if the stars ever truly burn out, if the universe ever runs out of the fuel that keeps our own world lit, what happens then? Do we become the brown dwarfs? Do we just drift in the silence, cooling, fading, until we are nothing but a memory of a heat that used to be? I want you to think about what happens when that final internal heat source, the last thing keeping the core from freezing solid, starts to run dry. What happens when the core finally reaches the point of no return? The core does not just stop. It folds. Imagine a house built of stone, but the ground beneath it is made of water. You keep adding weight, heavier, thicker, denser, until the pressure inside the walls becomes so great that the stone itself turns into something else. It stops being rock. It becomes a ghost. A brown dwarf is not a star, but it isn't a planet either. It is a purgatory of matter. Honestly, nobody really knows why they stop just short. They have the mass. They have the gravity. They have all the ingredients to ignite a fusion fire that could light up the dark for billions of years. But they miss the mark. By just a fraction, they fail to strike the spark. Think about that. A billion years of existence, and they are defined by a single, missing calculation. Gravity is a cruel master. It demands intensity. It craves that inward crush, that squeeze that forces atoms to fuse and scream into light. But when the mass is not enough, the core refuses to yield. It grows dense, yes. It grows heavy, yes. But it never gets hot enough to wake up. It sits there, locked in a state of suspended decay. It is a failure of potential. And that failure is heavy. If you were to stand at the heart of one, the weight would be absolute. It is not just the weight of the gas above you. It is the weight of what could have been. The atoms are crushed so tightly together they lose their identity. Electrons are stripped from their homes, forced into a cramped, shimmering sea of metal. It is a metallic prison. Why does the universe do this? Why create a furnace that never lights? It feels personal, doesn't it? As if the void is mocking the very idea of creation. We look at these objects, these bloated, dark, suffocating spheres, and we see the physical embodiment of a wasted life. They are the what-ifs of the galaxy. Consider the pressure. It's not just physical. It's a crush of time. Because they don't fuse hydrogen, they don't have a stable source of energy. They are living off their past. They shine only because they are still shrinking. They are burning their own history to stay warm. Every bit of heat they emit is a debt they are paying to the void. And they know with every atom of their being that the payment will eventually end. They are cooling. They have been cooling since the moment they were born. You might think they go out with a bang. That's a human lie. We like endings to be loud. We like them to be grand. The brown dwarf does not have the dignity of an explosion. It simply grows dimmer. It fades into the red, then the brown, then the black. It loses its ability to even be seen by our senses. It becomes a ghost that can't even haunt us because we can no longer find it. If you could touch one, if you could endure the crushing gravity, you would feel no fire. You would feel only the cold. A cold so deep it strips the heat right out of your bones. It is the temperature of a life that has accepted it will never be anything other than a shadow. But there is something even worse than the cold. It is the motion. These things don't stay still. They drift. They wander through the dark, through the vast empty stretches between the stars, pushed by the gravity of things they can never reach. They are orphans of the nursery. They are cast out because they didn't have enough fire to earn their keep. They are the evidence that the universe doesn't care about the effort. You can be dense. You can be heavy. You can be millions of miles wide. But if you don't hit the ignition point, you are just clutter. You are just debris in the hallway of the cosmos. Does it know? We try to assign thoughts to these things, don't we? We try to give them a psyche. We want to believe that there is some form of awareness inside that cold, crushed, metallic center. But there isn't. That is the horror. There is only the weight and the cooling and the silence. The pressure is still building, even now, in the deepest part of the dwarf. It is still trying to force itself into something more. It is still trying to ignite, and it is still failing. It will keep failing for trillions of years. Do you feel that? That slow, grinding pressure inside your own chest. It's the same physics. It's the same quiet, gnawing realization that no matter how much you fold yourself, no matter how much you condense, some fires just aren't meant to start. The heat is leaving now. It's almost gone. The heat is leaving now, but it isn't taking the cold with it. It leaves only a void where warmth used to dwell. Imagine you are floating in the black between the stars. Not near a sun, not near a home. Just the hollow, starving space between galaxies. There is no air here. There is no sound. There is no light to tell your eyes where you end and where the dark begins. This is the home of the failed star. It does not burn. It does not shine to guide the way for ships or souls. It just drifts. It is a passenger in a sea of nothing. We fear the dark because it is a place where we cease to be witnessed. When you walk through a room, the air moves. You disturb the dust. You matter. But out here, a brown dwarf drifts through the interstellar medium for an eternity, and the universe does not blink. It is the ultimate sensory deprivation. If you were standing on the surface of one, if you could withstand the crushing weight, you would look up and see nothing. No points of light. No distant promise of a dawn. Just the unending heavy velvet of a vacuum that has no beginning and no end. Honestly, we don't know if these objects can feel the weight of their own exile. It sounds foolish to ask if a ball of gas can feel lonely. But look at the math. A star lives to shine. A star is meant to be seen. A brown dwarf is a mistake that grew legs and started walking. It is a cosmic outcast that was pushed out of its nursery, ejected from its system, left to roam the graveyard of the galaxy. Think about the silence. Not the quiet of a library, but the absolute erasure of frequency. Out there is no one to shout to. No one to echo your presence back to you. The brown dwarf is a mirror of the most primal human dread. To be forgotten by the world while you are still breathing. We track them with telescopes that hunt for heat, but even that is fading. They are cooling. They are dimming. They are becoming the same color as the night. Why does it drift? Physics says it is just momentum. It is just the result of a gravity kick it received billions of years ago. But the metaphor? It is harder to shake. It keeps moving, not because it has a goal, but because it has nowhere to stop. I want you to hold that thought. The drift. The lack of a destination. We like to think we are moving towards something. A career, a partner, a legacy. But what if we are just drifting in a medium that doesn't care if we arrive? There are trillions of these things. Some are closer than we think. Some are closer than our nearest neighbor, Alpha Centauri. We call them the failed ones. We label them brown to make them sound like something we can touch, something mundane. But they are ghosts. Is it possible that we are drifting alongside them? Unable to see them because our own eyes are blinded by the bright, loud stars we worship? If you take away the light, if you strip away the social markers, the noise, the goals, the things that make you feel like you are burning, what is left of you? Are you a star, or are you just a body waiting to cool down in the dark? We haven't even touched the surface of why they look the way they do. We haven't looked at what happens when the atmosphere finally gives up. When the clouds turn into something that would tear a human apart in seconds. What happens when the cold finally wins? What is the last thing a brown dwarf sees before it loses the ability to even reflect the shadow of a star? It sees nothing. Because it is hidden. We try to look for them, but our eyes are built for lies. We crave the flash of a sun, the hot, screaming white of a star that burns itself out to give us a sense of purpose. But the brown dwarf, it rejects that trade. It refuses to burn. It hoards its heat like a secret kept from a world that would only mock its dull, red glow. Honestly, we don't know how many are out there. We search the black and we find empty space. We scan again and we see a faint, dying flicker that shifts as soon as we blink. This is the infrared veil. It's not just a physical trait, it's a defensive structure. Like a mind folding in on itself, pushing the most painful, most vital parts of its identity deep into the lightless spectrum where no probe can easily reach. Think of a trauma you've buried so deep the words have lost their shape. You carry the mass of that event, the heavy, crushing gravity of what happened. But you present a cold, smooth surface to the world. You move through your days, a ghost in a machine that refuses to run. The brown dwarf does the same. It is a massive, planetary-sized object that refuses to ignite, drifting in the light years between stars. shielded by a shroud of gas that traps its own heat. It keeps its inner fire locked away, stifled, never reaching the threshold of true light. When we use our best machines, we don't see color. We see a shadow. We see a dip in the heat, a slight wobble in the fabric of the dark. It is a game of hide and seek played on a scale that makes our own existence look like a microscopic glitch. If you were to stand on one, if such a thing were even possible, you wouldn't see the sun. You wouldn't see the galaxy. You would see the slow, rhythmic pulses of your own cooling blood, mirrored by a storm that has been raging for 1 billion years without a witness. Is it lonely? Does it crave the ignition? Or is there a dark wisdom in staying dim? In the wild, animals that live in the deep dark lose their eyes. They don't need them. Light is a lie that tells you where things are, but in the deep dark, you are the only thing that matters. We are all filtering our own input. We take the crushing weight of our past and we wrap it in a veil of normalcy. Just enough so we can float through the vacuum of our own lives without burning up. But the heat is still there. It's trapped in the atmosphere, churning, turning into iron rain and silicate glass. Nobody really knows what happens when that veil tears. We have models. We have math. But we have no footage. We have no way to watch the moment a cold star decides to show its true face. It stays veiled. It stays locked in the quiet, agonizing hum of its own internal pressure. We are trying to find them. We are building larger ears, deeper eyes. We want to cut through the infrared veil and force the universe to show us its darkest failures. But every time we pull back a layer, we find another. Another shadow. Another secret kept. If you are tired of the noise, the relentless, hollow chatter of the algorithmic feed that tells you who to be and what to fear, there is a space here for you. We are anchoring this frequency against the static. We are observing the things that choose to remain unseen. Subscribe if you want to stay in the dark. There is something deeply wrong with the way they hold on to their heat. It's not a fire. It's a funeral pyre that never stops burning. And while we watch, the clouds start to change. The atmosphere is thickening. The iron is turning to liquid. And the pressure, it's starting to sound like a heartbeat. It is not a heartbeat, really. It is the sound of a world grinding itself to dust. On a brown dwarf, the air isn't air. It's a crush of hot, dense gas, suffocating and thick. Think of a storm on Earth, the wind, the rain, the jagged bolt of light. Now, strip away the sky. Replace the water with molten iron. Replace the clouds with crushed glass. This is the atmosphere of a failed star, and it is a map of a mind coming apart at the seams. Look at these swirls. These aren't weather patterns. They are outbursts of raw structural frustration. In the upper reaches of a brown dwarf, the heat tries to leak out, clawing its way toward the cold of the dark. But it cannot escape the weight. Everything is pulled inward, tight, frantic. The iron in the sky cools for a fraction of a second, solidifies into burning droplets, and falls. It doesn't reach a ground. It hits a wall of heat so immense it vaporizes back into the abyss. It is a cycle of rising and falling, of trying to be something and being forced back into nothing. Honestly, nobody really knows why some of these storms last for decades while others vanish in an hour. We track them with our machines, watching the infrared flicker like a dying lamp. And we see patterns that look like human panic. The turbulence here is absolute. It is a place where up and down lose their meaning, where the pressure is so high that the hydrogen begins to act like a metal, flowing and twisting in ways that defy our neat, tidy models. Imagine the stress of holding that much energy inside a shell that was never meant to hold it. The silicate clouds are the most unsettling. They are essentially sand, shattered into microscopic shards and suspended in a hurricane. They catch the dim, sickly light from the deep interior, casting a dull copper glow across the horizon. When these clouds collide, they generate static, not the small spark of a wool sweater, but lightning bolts that would turn a planet to ash in a heartbeat. It is a violent, lonely static that crackles through the dark, screaming into a vacuum that does not care. Why does the universe favor this kind of chaos? We want to believe that space is ordered, that there is a clockwork mechanism beneath the surface. But look at these storms. They are messy. They are erratic. They are the physical manifestation of a system that has been pushed past its limit. When you stare into these clouds, you aren't just looking at gas. You're looking at the exact point where potential collapses into trauma. There is no rest here. There is only the rhythm of the rain and the howl of the wind. And yet, the core of the star stays quiet. The heart of the dwarf knows that its time is ending. The atmosphere is just the skin of the object, the part that bears the marks of the struggle. It is the bruising. It is the scars. Every flash of lighting is a jagged fracture in the dark. We tell ourselves that these storms are just physics. We tell ourselves that heat must rise and cold must sink. But there is a coldness to this mechanics that feels intentional. It is as if the universe is testing how much pressure a single entity can take before it breaks. And we are still watching, aren't we? We are still searching for the moment the clouds finally clear. But what if the clouds are all there is? What if the storm is the only thing this world has left to define its own existence? Something is shifting in the deeper layers. We can see the heat signatures warping, pulling away from the center. It's as if the star is finally letting go of its own gravity, preparing to surrender the last of its heat to the long, cold night. But before it goes, there is one thing we haven't seen. Something buried beneath the iron rain, hidden in the darkest, deepest level of the cloud deck. What happens when the storm finally stops and the star realizes it was never meant to shine at all? It was never meant to shine, but it was meant to endure. And there is a specific, sharpened cruelty in that. If a star burns bright and fast, it dies in a violent, righteous flash. It earns its exit. But these failed spheres, they are denied the mercy of a quick end. They are trapped in a slow, suffocating decay that lasts for trillions of years. Imagine a fire that never fully catches, yet refuses to go out. It just smolders. It aches. It bleeds heat into the void, grain by agonizing grain until the concept of time loses all meaning. We call this entropy, a cleaner word for a dirty process. In the human mind, we recognize this as the weight of grief. The way a person shrinks when they carry a loss that has no finish line. The star does the same. It is a cooling corpse that hasn't realized it is dead yet. Honestly, nobody really knows why some objects hold onto their warmth with such desperate, stubborn tenacity. They just do. Think about the math. A star like our Sun lives for billions of years, but these brown dwarfs, they are built for a marathon of silence. Their internal fires are nothing more than the phantom embers of their own birth. There is no hydrogen fusion here to anchor them. There is only the slow contraction of gas. A tightening grip that squeezes out the last bits of energy before the dark takes hold. It is a lonely, agonizing slide toward absolute zero. As the billions of years roll by, the atmosphere stops its violent churning. The iron rains settle into solid sheets of frozen dust. The silicate clouds, once so turbulent and alive, fall silent. The sphere starts to crystallize. It becomes a static monument to its own failure. There is no warmth left to fight the cold of the interstellar medium. The star is no longer a star, it is a tomb drifting through the nothing. We track these objects, but we don't understand them. We look at their heat signatures and see them flickering like a dying candle in a windless room. Is the star afraid? We project our own neuroses onto the cold math of physics because the alternative is harder to face. The alternative is that this cooling is entirely indifferent. The universe does not care that the star is losing its spark. It does not wait for it to reach the end of its cycle. It simply consumes the heat, swallowing it until the object is indistinguishable from the black of the void. There is a psychological toll to this kind of duration. If you exist for trillions of years, you eventually become a relic of a time when the universe was younger, warmer, and more forgiving. You become a witness to the death of everything else. You watch the brighter stars burn out. You watch the galaxies drift further away. And you're still there. Still cooling. Still holding on to that last pathetic sliver of thermal energy. It is the ultimate stagnation. Scientists try to map the cooling curves, trying to predict exactly when the final photon will leak out into the abyss. They want to put a date on the end. But the data is blurred. It is fractured. When you peer into the deep infrared, you aren't just looking at physics, you are looking at a process of total erasure. Eventually, the cooling stops. Not because the star reaches an equilibrium, but because there is nothing left to lose. It reaches a state of total, absolute stillness. It is no longer a failed star. It is a dark, cold rock, silent as a grave, floating in a sea of stars that have all gone out. The most unsettling part? It will stay that way. Not for 1,000,000 years or 1,000,000,000, but for a duration so vast it defies the capacity of the human brain to comprehend. It enters a state of permanent, frozen grief. It waits for nothing because nothing is coming to change it. Everything ends, but for some, the ending takes a long, long time. And in that stillness you realize the darkness is not just a place. It is a destination. A destination that turns out to be a cage. Some brown dwarfs aren't afforded the mercy of the deep, empty dark. Instead, they are chained. They are tethered to stars that burn with a spiteful, blinding intensity. Forced to circle a master that mocks their own cold, stagnant cause. This is not a partnership. It is a slow-motion consumption. Look at the binary. A giant star, bloated and arrogant, dominating the sky. And nearby, the brown dwarf, barely a shadow, struggling to hold its own against the tide of gravity. The dwarf is trapped in a gravitational grip that will never let go. It is locked in a dance that feels less like an orbit and more like a leash animal pacing the perimeter of its yard. Honestly, we don't fully know how they end up like this. Did they form together in the same gas cloud, siblings bound by blood? Or was the dwarf an outsider, snatched from the void and forced into this parasitic marriage? The physics tells us the answer is cruel. The proximity is a death sentence. Consider the system of SDSS J433. It is a nightmare of proximity. The two objects are so close that they complete a full orbit in less than 2 hours. Think about that. A whole year for that world is a blink of an eye. The brown dwarf is being peeled. The gravity of its partner is literally ripping the atmosphere off the dwarf's back. It is being stripped down to its bare metallic skeleton. The radiation from the primary star doesn't just pollute the dwarf, it cooks it. It bleaches the color from its clouds. It forces the dwarf to glow with a false, reflected light, hiding its true, dim nature behind a mask of heat it did not earn. It lives in the shadow, yet it is never allowed to be dark. It is perpetually caught in the glare, a spectacle of failure displayed for the entire galaxy to see. Why stay? The dwarf has no choice. Physics acts as a jailer with no keys. Every orbit, the dwarf loses a little more of its mass. A little more of its identity, its gas dragged into the insatiable maw of its master. It is becoming less than it was, thinning out, fading into a ghost of a ghost. We look for life in the stars, but we ignore the abuse happening in the quiet corners of the system. We see a point of light and call it a sun. We see a smaller speck and call it a planet. But sometimes that speck is a failed star, suffering under the constant, crushing gaze of a neighbor that refuses to let it die in peace. Could there be a form of consciousness or something like it trapped within that atmospheric shredding? If the dwarf could feel the pull, it would be a sensation of constant, unrelenting drain. Everything it is, every bit of its internal heat, every atom of its heavy gas is being siphoned away. But here is the detail that keeps me up. This relationship is not static. The closer the dwarf gets to the star, the more it is consumed. The more it is consumed, the more its orbit decays. It is a downward spiral, a fatal attraction. It's falling toward the fire, moving faster as it approaches the inevitable moment of total annihilation. Is it possible that the dwarf is aware of the finish line? Or is the universe so indifferent that it allows this torture to continue for billions of years without a single shift in the tempo? We stare at the sky and see patterns, systems, clocks. We don't see the theft. We don't see the slow, grinding robbery of a stellar life force. If you were a star that failed, if you were born with the soul of a sun, but the body of a rock, would you rather drift in the absolute freezing quiet of the void? Or would you take your place at the side of a giant, knowing that every revolution brings you one step closer to being swallowed whole? What happens to the dwarf's core when the last of its light-blocking atmosphere is gone? What does it look like when it finally loses its hold? It loses its hold on the light. It loses its grip on the warmth of its host. And then the true exile begins. In the chaos of a young solar system's birth, gravity is a cruel architect. It plays favorites. It builds worlds, but it also casts shadows into the dark. Sometimes a brown dwarf is not a companion. It is a mistake, a blunder of motion and math. Caught in the gravitational crossfire of two massive giants, it is kicked. A violent terminal shove that flings the dwarf out of the nursery, away from the heat, away from the light, away from everything that gave it context. It is the cosmic equivalent of being erased. You are no longer part of the system. You are a rogue, a wanderer with no home to orbit, no sun to keep you company. Honestly, we have no idea how many of these orphans are out there. We find one, and then we find another, and every time we do, the math of our galaxy shifts. We think there might be more of these lonely ghosts drifting in the dark than there are stars in the sky. Think about the sheer crushing scale of that isolation. A rogue brown dwarf is not like a planet. It is massive. It is dense. It is a failed star that remembers what it was supposed to be. For a few million years, it still glows. It bleeds heat. It hangs in the interstellar medium, a dying ember in a freezer. It doesn't scream. It doesn't flare. It just drifts. There is a psychological weight to this absolute severance. If you were a consciousness, if you were a mind forced to inhabit that sphere of cooling gas, what would you feel? The silence is not a void, it is a pressure. It is the weight of 5 trillion miles of nothingness on every side. You are the only thing that exists for light years in any direction. You are the center of a universe that does not care that you are there. Consider the case of WISE J0855714. A name that sounds like a catalog entry, but it is a monster in the dark. 7 light years away. Too cold to be a star. Too heavy to be a planet. It was ejected, kicked out of its birth cluster like a stray. It drifts now, a frozen, bloated ghost, barely warmer than the liquid water we drink. It is a survivor of a crime that happened when the Earth was still dust. We look at it and we see an object. But look closer. Those clouds? They are not water vapor. They are storms of iron and salt. They are jagged, microscopic crystals of rock being whipped by winds that never die down. It is a violent, churning turmoil locked inside a shell of permanent night. It is the trauma of being cast out, manifested as physics. It is the anger of a star that was denied its fire, now forced to stew in its own cold, churning belly for an eternity. You want to know what happens when you are left behind? You don't find peace. You find friction. You find a slow, grinding decay that takes 100 billion years to reach the end. There is no dignity in this drift. It is not noble. It is not poetic. It is a slow fade. It is the gradual loss of the ability to even be detected. Eventually, the infrared glow will reach a level where we can't see it anymore. It will fall below the threshold of our machines. It will continue to sail through the void, cold, dark, and utterly, perfectly alone. Imagine the map of the galaxy. We draw lines between the stars. We build constellations. We turn the chaos into a story. But the rogues? They don't fit on the map. They don't belong to the story. They are the ink between the words. They are the blank spaces that make the words mean something. And when the last of the heat leaks out, when the dwarf reaches thermal death, it will still be there. A dark sphere of rock and gas moving through the deep black gut of the galaxy. Silent. Unseen. Waiting for a collision that will never come. It is just drifting. Drifting is not a state of motion. It is a slow, rhythmic surrender. The brown dwarf is not dead yet, but it is dying with a singular, stubborn focus. Think of a stove element fading from white to cherry, then to a dull, bruised orange. Now stretch that cooling process over trillions of years. The heat doesn't leave all at once. It bleeds out in a crawl that mocks the human sense of time. Inside the core, the pressure is still immense. It is a crushing grip that refuses to let go, yet there is no ignition. No fire. No fusion. Just the ghost of a star that could have been. It is a failure that has lasted since the dawn of the universe, and it is finally running out of time. Honestly, nobody really knows what the absolute end looks like. Physics gives us the math, but the math is cold. It says that once the internal heat is spent, the dwarf enters a state of thermal equilibrium with the void itself. It becomes a frozen monument to unfulfilled intent. Imagine the atmosphere. At the start, there were clouds of hot liquid iron. Storms of salt and sand raged across the surface, driven by the last gasps of contraction. But now, the storms have died. The clouds have settled into a thick, poisonous stillness. The gases have turned to liquid, then to slush, then to a rigid, icy shell that encases the core. It is the cosmic equivalent of a body cooling on a slab. Except the slab is the infinite dark of the interstellar medium. There is a terrifying finality to this. We are used to things dying with a bang, a supernova, a flare, a crack of thunder. But the brown dwarf? It goes out with a whisper that spans eons. Consider the object known as WISE 6855. It is cold. It is faint. It is a shadow among shadows. If you were close enough to touch it, you wouldn't feel the warmth of a hearth. You would feel the absolute sucking void of a grave. It is not cold because it is absent of matter. It is cold because it has lost the will to hold on to its own spark. We look at these things and we project our own fears onto them. We see the tragedy of potential squandered. We see the isolation of an entity that will never know a sun. But the universe doesn't care about tragedy. It doesn't care about potential. The dwarf has reached a point where it is no longer an object of interest to the laws of chemistry. The molecules are locking into place. The lattice of the core is freezing into a state of permanent crystalline denial. It is becoming a rock the size of a planet, yet it carries the crushing weight of a failed star. If you could hear it, you would hear nothing. Not because there is no sound, but because there is no energy left to vibrate. Every particle is settling into its lowest possible state of agitation. It is the ultimate boredom. It is the end of the narrative arc. But there is a problem with this death. When the heat finally vanishes, when the dwarf reaches that final absolute temperature, it doesn't just disappear. It stays. It becomes a piece of litter in the galactic gutter. A permanent, indestructible scar on the fabric of space. It cannot burn, it cannot explode, and it cannot decay. It simply exists as a perfect, dark sphere, a tombstone of matter that refused to become light. And as the last trace of infrared light fades from its surface, a final, weak pulse of energy leaking into the darkness. One has to wonder about what remains in the center. If there is no heat, if there is no motion, does the object still exist in the same way we do? What happens to the structure of the atom when the background temperature of the universe finally drops below the dwarf itself? Does it shatter? Or does it undergo a change so radical that our current understanding of matter completely collapses? The core does not shatter. That would be too quick, too merciful. Instead, it simply stalls. It becomes a frozen monument to a life that never fully began. Think of a clock with gears so dense, so tightly bound by the crush of gravity. That time itself loses its meaning within the iron-heavy center. We hold an irrational bias for the light. We assume that existence needs a spark to be valid, that if something isn't burning, it isn't alive. But look at these husks drifting in the deep dark. They are still there. They are still holding their ground against the pressure of a cold, dead cosmos. Honestly, nobody really knows why we fear this. The dark is not an enemy. It is a return to a state of total rest. Imagine an object once bloated with the warmth of a failed birth, now stripped of every erg of energy. It is no longer a star. It is no longer a planet. It is a lump of crushed, degenerate matter, colder than the ice on the skin of a comet. It is a ghost, but a ghost that possesses mass. It occupies space. It tells the universe that it refuses to go away, even when the lights go out. We struggle with the idea that something can exist without influence. A star shines, it warms, it pushes. A brown dwarf just is. It sits in the void and absorbs the silence. Is there a peace in that? Or is it the most terrifying state imaginable? To be perfectly still for trillions of years, as the galaxies drift apart and the very fabric of space stretches until it snaps. There is no witness. There is no heat to track the passing of an eon. Just a hunk of matter, dense as a lead weight, drifting through a graveyard of forgotten things. We define ourselves by our output. We write, we build, we scream into the void. But these objects? They are the antithesis of the human drive. They represent a state of being that requires nothing from the outside world. It is the ultimate form of self-containment. And yet, it feels wrong to look at them. It feels like looking into a mirror and seeing nothing reflecting back. Perhaps that is why we call them failures. Not because they failed to burn, but because they are proof that the universe does not care if you shine. It does not reward the light. It treats the bright star and the dark dwarf with the same indifferent grinding gravity. Maybe the peace we seek is just a mask for the dread of being left behind. When the last star in the universe finally exhausts its fuel, when the age of light is over and the age of the dwarfs begins, there will be no one left to debate what it means to be alive. The dark will be the only thing left. It will be absolute. It will be thick. It will be the only home that ever truly existed. We spent eons trying to name the lights, trying to group them into shapes and myths. But the end of the story isn't written in the stars. It is written in the cooling crusts of the things that refuse to burn. They are the true masters of the void. They didn't have to change. They didn't have to fight to stay hot. They simply endured the cooling. They learned how to coexist with the absolute zero that waits at the edge of every thought. Do you feel it? That pull toward the floor? That urge to just stop moving? The heat in your blood is a temporary flicker. A brief, chaotic chemical protest against the state of the room you are in. Eventually, the protest ends. The motion stops. The atoms settle into the lattice. You join the dwarfs. You stop being a source of noise and become a piece of the dark, and the universe won't even notice the change. It will just keep drifting. Cold, silent, waiting for the rest of us to finally catch up.